Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and some unfortunate breaking injury news that we got to discuss here on today's show. Ian Rappaport, multiple NFL insiders are now reporting the Texans do not expect Joe Mixon to return this season. We had been holding out hope. We had thought maybe he'd be able to come back if the Texans went on a playoff run or, made it a couple rounds deep in the playoffs, that maybe we would see a Joe Mixon or some sort of situation like that. But according to Ian Rappaport, it does not look like 28 is going to go back out there on the field. Now, I'll discuss what that means for the Texans moving forward in that running back room, what it means moving forward going into next season and years, going on year after year. Will we see Joe Mixon ever again in a Texans uniform? And I'm going to discuss a little bit on the back half about this Texans versus Bills matchup. But before we get started, this is why you hit that sub button. I was about to get ready to go in. I'll be live later on tonight for Texans Bills Thursday night football, but I saw the news and I was like, you know what? I just got to make a video right now because it's upsetting as a Texans fan, and we kind of knew. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, you kind of knew, right? We kind of had a feeling like Joe Mixon wouldn't come back. Like, I had been holding out hope and, doing the mental math in my head of, oh, well, if he got injured here and, the recovery is 4 to 6 months, it puts him about here. And I had landed on, the end of December as a time that we would be able to see Joe Mixon based on reports, based on, him getting injured again during the offseason. There's been, reports here and there about, obviously a lot of speculation because Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, they refused to talk about Joe Mixon and the injury, but it was a non-football injury this offseason. He was on the NFI list, and there are rumors, speculation that he got a surgery without the consent of the Texans organization. He went behind their back, this, that, and the other. I'm not here to speculate or say that Joe Mixon did this, did that, did whatever. All I know is, according to multiple sources now, Joe Mixon will not be suiting up for the Houston Texans during the 2025 season. Now, my question to you is simple. Will we ever see Joe Mixon in a Texans uniform again? Give me a yes, give me a no down in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts, because after I tell you about, the contract and everything around that, maybe that'll change your mind. But let me know down in the comment section, will we ever see Joe Mixon as a member of this Houston Texans team again? Now, I will say, with everything going around, Joe Mixon has still been a great teammate. And hear me out. Even with his injuries, even with, obviously there being something going on behind the scenes, because it wouldn't be this hush-hush, it wouldn't be this big of a deal with Caserio, with D'Amico Ryans, if there wasn't some other underlying factor that had to do with this. Maybe some tension between them and Mixon's team, this, that, or the other. But Mixon has been nothing but, complimentary of this team throughout the entire year. The past couple of games, he's been live tweeting the games, encouraging his teammates. He was there at the Texans 49ers game, there in the locker room, was live tweeting during that game and was, celebrating with the team after the win. So Mixon, the person, Mixon, the teammate for this Texans organization, I think that lends it into being, okay, maybe he does return next season and play for this Texans team. But the problem lies with the contract, because when I'm looking at Joe Mixon's contract going into next season, so this offseason, if they release him, they save $8.5 million. They only accrue $2 million in dead cap, and the exact same thing if they trade him. If they cut him or if they trade him, they're going to save $8.5 million against the cap, only $2 million in dead cap. And for a team that's looking to re-sign Will Anderson Jr., re-sign CJ Stroud on a possible extension this offseason, and make some more moves, sign an offensive lineman maybe, you're going to need that money. And $8.5 million for Joe Mixon, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get. A running back where we all know the running back position in the NFL has a shorter, shelf life than a lot of other positions. We see guys, exit from their NFL careers at the running back spot whenever they're 30, 31. And what is Joe Mixon? Joe Mixon is turning that golden age of 30. So, the fact that he's getting up there in age. He's going to be into his, 30s by the time next season rolls around. And last year of his deal, you can save all that money. I think that lends itself into saying, we're not going to see Joe Mixon as a member of the Houston Texans because Woody Marks, he's been playing really well. Nick Chubb has, been a decent addition this offseason. They're going to carry the Texans on into next year. But if I'm Nick Caserio, if I'm the Houston Texans front office, I'm looking at the draft, namely, I don't think first round pick, but you can definitely get a good running back in the second, third, fourth round, just like the Texans did with Woody Marks this past season. Or, a lot of good running backs have been signed in free agency. You look at two of the top backs this season, Rico Dowdle with the Panthers, J.K. Dobbins with the Denver Broncos. Both of those guys signed for under $5 million. So much cheaper, and they've been having great production throughout this season. So as I look at Joe Mixon, as I look at this Texans team, it just, lends itself into being a situation where, of course, the Texans would want Joe Mixon to be out there. He's an excellent player, and I think if you look at the Texans offense in 2024, the reason why it's a little bit better, maybe not a little bit, but much better than the Texans offense this season, Joe Mixon's playmaking, if you go back and watch those games from last season, his playmaking is incredible. And I think, if it wasn't a money issue, if it wasn't a contract and age and all those things kind of coming together, I do think we'd see Joe Mixon back on this team. We'll talk more about the Texans, more about this Thursday night matchup and Joe Mixon in just a moment, but couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our sponsor over at PrizePicks. The hard-hitting football action is better with PrizePicks. The weather, it's changing, but the feeling of being right never gets old. Keep the season rolling on PrizePicks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. And I've been, showing y'all my PrizePicks lineup for tonight's game, and I'm using one of the new features that's called Stacks. So I'm going with Nico Collins, more on his receiving yards and more on his rushing and receiving touchdowns. I just think, with Davis Mills in at quarterback for this Texans team, if you're putting in a PrizePicks lineup, which you should, that link is down in the comment section and description of today's show, you got to go with the more on Nico. He's going to force feed Nico. He has that connection with him. They have a great rapport, Nico and Davis Mills. So he's definitely going to look Nico's way, get the ball to 12, because 12, he's always open. And you can put 12 in your lineup today with PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use that code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Now, kind of putting a bow on this Joe Mixon situation, I will say, I was wrong. I did think that Joe Mixon would be able to return in December and, maybe play the end of the season for this Texans team, but you never know with injuries and how everything plays out, and and that's part of the reason too, because nobody really knows exactly what's going on with Joe Mixon other than a couple people in that building, and it's a one-way street with information coming out of NRG around Joe Mixon, and it goes right through Nick Caserio. So if you're not on the Nick Caserio bandwagon, if you're not with him, then you're not going to get that information. And even if you are, this team has been so tight-lipped with Joe Mixon and everything around his injury. So, who knows what setbacks he faced? Who knows, what he was able to do throughout the past couple months recovering from this injury. So, we'll see. It is going to be very interesting to see if the Texans do cut Joe Mixon, where he signs or who ends up signing Mixon next offseason, because I do believe a team will give him a chance. Back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons the past 2 years for Mixon with the Texans and then with the Bengals prior. 30 years old, still probably has a couple of years left, couple more years in the tank, but we'll have to see what happens this next offseason. I would say more than likely the Texans end up cutting Joe Mixon. Now, before I get out of here, reminder, I will be live tonight for Texans versus Bills. So make sure you tune in. Make sure you get ready, because the Texans, they can go into the win column and for the first time this season have a winning record and get one step closer to possibly getting in the playoffs in this very contested AFC playoff race. with tonight, obviously CJ Stroud, Jalen Petrie out, Jamal Hill as well. The Texans claimed Damone Clark off of waivers, the Cowboys linebacker, to kind of replace that Jamal Hill, shift linebacker slash really in special teams is where they're going to need him. So I think, this Texans team coming into tonight, battle red, I expect it to be a close one. I expect it to be a defensive matchup. And speaking of the running backs, how poetic would it be to have a Woody Marks or Nick Chubb game where they, maybe combined go for 100 yards? Because I think that's possible. Last week, the Bucs ran all over this Bills defense. Sean Tucker and Rachaad White had a combined, I want to say 150 yards, 3 touchdowns between the two of those guys. I think this Texans running back duo can exploit this Bills rush defense, which is one of the worst in the National Football League. And like I said, how poetic would that be if Woody Marks, Nick Chubb have themselves a game tonight up against the Buffalo Bills? I definitely think it's possible. It's one of my keys to victory because, Davis Mills, he's really worked well off of play action and those PA boots, rolling, fake stretching to the right, rolling to his left, and finding a crossing route over the center of the field. He's done really well the past 2 weeks in those concepts, so I would like to see the Texans try to get the run game going, work some play action off of that, and get some points on the board because, the Bills, they put up more than 40 last week. I don't think they're going to do that this week up against the Texans defense, which is, top 5 in the NFL, but it's still Josh Allen. They're going to put up some points, so this Texans offense needs to do the same. That's all I got for you on today's show, folks. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Chuggs, and if you made it to the end of the video, hit that subscribe button for daily Texans content all year long.